The academy floated in the darkness of space like a giant wheel made of silver and glass. It was one of the oldest schools in the known galaxy, and students from dozens of different alien species came here to learn how to talk to each other, how to make peace between worlds, and how to understand creatures very different from themselves. Danny Cole pressed his face against the window of the shuttle as it approached the station. He was 22 years old, born and raised in a small town in Nebraska, where the biggest excitement was the county fair each summer. Now he was millions of miles from Earth, about to start his first semester at an alien school where he would be one of only 3 humans. The shuttle docked with a soft bump, and Danny grabbed his bag and walked through the airlock into the academy. The main hallway was enormous, with ceilings so high that clouds actually formed near the top. Aliens of every shape and size moved past him. Some walked on 2 legs like him. Others floated through the air or crawled along the walls. A few seemed to be made entirely of light. Danny had studied the different species before coming here, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. A group of passed by, each one standing nearly 8 feet tall with skin and 4 arms. Their faces showed no emotion, and they moved with a kind of military precision that made Danny feel very small. Behind them came a cluster of beings made of pure glowing energy that shifted between blue and gold as they communicated with each other in ways Danny could not understand. He found his dormitory room after getting lost 3 times and asking for directions from a helpful creature called a. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed that adjusted itself to his body's shape and a window that looked out at the stars. Danny sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. He had no idea how he had ended up here. His test scores had been good but not amazing. His interview had gone well, but he had stumbled over several questions about interstellar politics. Yet somehow, the Earth Galactic Exchange Program had chosen him for one of their 3 scholarships. His mother had cried when he left. His father had shaken his hand and told him to make them proud. His younger sister had made him promise to bring back something cool from space. Danny had promised all of them that he would do his best, even though he had no idea what his best would look like in a place like this. The first few weeks of classes were overwhelming. Danny attended lectures on the history of galactic civilizations, the basics of universal translation technology, and the complex rules of diplomatic protocol. Most of his classmates had been preparing for this their entire lives. They came from families with long traditions of interstellar service. They spoke multiple languages and understood cultural references that went completely over Danny's head. But Danny had one advantage that he did not fully understand yet. He was very good at watching and listening. While other students rushed to answer questions and prove themselves, Danny sat in the back of the room and paid attention. He noticed things that others missed. He saw how the tensed slightly when they came too close, a sign of an old conflict between their species. He noticed how the students always chose seats near the exits, a habit that came from their prey animal instincts. He watched and he learned, and slowly he began to understand the hidden patterns of alien behavior. It was in his class that everything changed. Professor was a species known for their brilliant purple scales and their 4 muscular arms. He stood at the front of the lecture hall and looked out at his students with eyes that seemed to see right through them. Danny sat in his usual spot in the back row, his notebook open and his pen ready. "This semester," Professor said, his voice deep and rumbling, "you will face the most difficult examination of your academic careers. It will not test your knowledge of facts or your ability to write essays. It will test something far more important. It will test your ability to maintain control when everything inside you is screaming to run away." The room went very quiet. Danny looked around and saw that even the usually calm were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "The Academy has acquired something very old and very dangerous," the professor continued. "It is called Specimen 77. It was found on a derelict ship at the edge of unexplored space, and it has been studied by our scientists for nearly a century. It is a consciousness without physical form. It exists as pure thought and energy, and it feeds on fear. A student near the front of the room flickered nervously, their light dimming for a moment before stabilizing. Specimen 77 has the ability to reach into your mind and find your deepest, darkest fears. It can then manifest those fears in ways that seem completely real. You will see them, hear them, feel them, and you will believe with every fiber of your being that they are truly happening. Professor paused to let his words sink in. Your examination is simple. You will enter a sealed chamber with specimen 77 for 1 hour. If you can maintain your composure and not break down, you will pass. If you cannot, you will fail. There are no second chances. There is no way to prepare. You will face whatever lives in the darkest corners of your own mind, and you will either survive it or you will not. Danny felt his heart beating faster, but he kept his face calm. Around him, the other students were whispering to each other in worried voices. They were dimming and brightening rapidly, a sign of extreme stress. Even they were clicking their mandibles in distress. You have 3 weeks to prepare yourselves mentally, Professor said. I suggest you use that time wisely. Class dismissed. As the other students filed out of the room, Danny remained in his seat for a long moment. He thought about fear. He thought about all the things that had scared him throughout his life, from the monsters under his bed when he was a child to the uncertainty of leaving Earth behind. He thought about the dark and the unknown and all the terrible things that might be waiting in the shadows. And then he thought about something else. He thought about the creature that was going to be in that chamber with him, the thing that everyone called Specimen 77, a consciousness without a body, a being that fed on fear because that was all it knew. Danny wondered if anyone had ever asked Specimen 77 what it was afraid of. He packed up his notebook and walked out of the classroom, already thinking about the test that was coming. He did not know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. And somewhere deep in the Academy's research wing, locked in a containment field that had held it for decades, Specimen 77 was waiting. It had been waiting for a very long time. And soon, it would meet the one being in the entire galaxy who would look at it and see something other than a monster. The 3 weeks passed faster than anyone wanted them to. Danny spent his days attending classes and his nights lying awake in his small room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about what was coming. He tried to prepare himself mentally, but how do you prepare for something when you do not know what form it will take? He talked to the other students when he could, trying to learn from their experiences and their fears. They believed that showing any emotion was a sign of weakness, so they planned to simply shut down their feelings entirely. They were terrified because their greatest fear was darkness, and they knew that Specimen 77 would use that against them. The students had developed a kind of group meditation technique that they hoped would help them stay calm. Morgan was one of the other 2 human students at the academy. She found Danny in the dining hall one evening and sat down across from him without asking permission. "You seem calm," she said, studying his face with curious eyes. She was a few years older than him, with short brown hair and a no-nonsense attitude that Danny admired. "Everyone else is falling apart, but you just sit there like nothing is wrong." Danny shrugged. "I am scared," he admitted. "I just do not see the point in panicking about it. The test is coming whether I panic or not." Laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That is such a human thing to say. The aliens think we are all crazy, you know. They cannot understand how we can be afraid of something and still walk toward it anyway." "Maybe that is just how we survive," Danny said. "Back home, we have this thing called exposure therapy. When you are afraid of something, you face it over and over until it stops controlling you. We have been doing that for thousands of years. Horror movies, haunted houses, telling scary stories around campfires. We actually enjoy being scared sometimes." "Try explaining that to us," said, shaking her head. "They think we are absolutely insane." The day of the examination arrived cold, and the students gathered in a large waiting room outside the testing chamber, and Danny could feel the fear in the air like a physical thing. They were barely glowing at all, their light almost completely dimmed by their terror. They stood in rigid lines, their forearms crossed over their chests, trying desperately to show no emotion. They huddled together in small groups, their antennae twitching constantly. Danny sat alone in a corner, watching everyone else and thinking. The tests began at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Students were called one at a time, in alphabetical order by species. They went first. Danny watched through the observation window as each one entered the chamber, a vast white room with no furniture and no decoration. For the first few minutes, nothing would happen. Then the walls would begin to shift and change, and the screaming would start. Some students lasted longer than others. A few made it past the 30-minute mark before breaking down. Most did not. They would emerge from the chamber pale and shaking, their eyes wide with terror, unable to speak about what they had seen. The medical team would rush them away for evaluation, and the next student would be called. Went in with the second group of humans. Danny watched her through the observation window, his hands pressed against the glass. For the first few minutes, she stood tall and strong, her shoulders back and her chin held high. Then the room began to fill with water. It rose up from the floor, clear and cold, and his face twisted with panic. She had almost drowned as a child, Danny knew. That memory had never left her. She lasted 43 minutes before she broke. Danny watched as she fell to her knees in the water, sobbing and begging for it to stop. The medical team pulled her out and wrapped her in blankets, and she did not look at anyone as they led her away. They went next. They did better than most of the other species, their emotional control helping them resist the fear for longer periods of time. But even they could not hold out forever. One by one, they emerged from the chamber with cracks in their stoic masks, their four hands trembling slightly despite their best efforts to hide it. They were the worst. Their fear of darkness was so deep and so primal that Specimen 77 barely had to try. The chamber would go completely black, and they would begin to fade, their light dimming as their terror consumed them. Several had to be rescued before the hour was up because their vital signs became dangerously unstable. Finally, it was Danny's turn. He stood up from his corner and walked toward the chamber door. The other waiting students watched him go, and he could see the pity in their eyes. They expected him to fail, just like everyone else had failed. Humans were not known for their mental strength or their emotional control. If they could not resist Specimen 77, what chance did a young man from Nebraska have? Danny stopped at the door and took a deep breath. He thought about his mother and father, about his sister waiting for him to come home with stories of space. He thought about all the scary movies he had watched as a kid, hiding under blankets but always peeking out to see what happened next. He thought about the strange thrill of being afraid and the satisfaction of surviving that fear. Then he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The chamber was exactly as he had seen it through the observation window. White walls, white floor, white ceiling. No shadows, no hiding places, no escape. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Danny heard the locks engage. For a long moment, nothing happened. Danny stood in the center of the room, his hands in his pockets, and waited. He did not tense up or try to prepare himself for attack. He simply waited, curious to see what would happen next. Then the walls began to change. The white surface darkened, turning and then black. Shapes began to emerge from the shadows, crawling things with too many legs and eyes that glowed with hungry light. The temperature dropped sharply, and Danny could see his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Whispers filled the room, voices that sounded almost familiar, saying things that he could not quite understand. Danny watched it all with calm interest. The shadows grew deeper, the shapes grew larger, the whispers grew louder, and now he could recognize them. His mother's voice telling him he would never be good enough. His father's voice saying he should never have left home. His sister's voice asking why he had abandoned her. Danny felt the fear rising in his chest, cold and sharp. But he did not run. He did not scream. He simply stood there and let the fear wash over him like a wave washing over a rock. And then he did something that no one had ever done before. He spoke. "Is that the best you can do?" he asked the darkness. "Because I have got to be honest with you, I have seen scarier stuff in movies." The shadows stopped moving. The whispers fell silent. And somewhere in the darkness, something ancient and powerful turned its full attention to the strange little human who was not behaving the way he was supposed to. For the first time in a very long time, Specimen 77 was curious. Specimen 77 had existed for longer than most civilizations. It had drifted through the cold darkness of space for thousands of years before anyone found it. It had been captured and studied and tested, and used as a tool to break the minds of countless beings. It had tasted the fears of 100 different species, from the simple terrors of primitive creatures to the complex anxieties of the most advanced minds in the galaxy. But it had never encountered anything quite like this human. The creature pushed harder, digging deeper into Danny's mind to find the fears buried there. It found the memory of being lost in the woods as a child, alone and cold, and certain that he would never be found. It found the moment when his grandfather had died, and Danny had understood for the first time that everyone he loved would someday be gone. It found the quiet terror of leaving Earth behind, of floating through the endless void of space, so far from everything familiar. The chamber transformed around Danny. The walls became trees, tall and dark and pressing close. The floor became soft earth covered in dead leaves. The air grew cold and smelled of rain and rotting wood. Danny was 7 years old again, lost in the forest behind his grandmother's house, calling for help that never came. He felt the fear grip his heart. He felt his breath coming faster, his hands starting to shake. The old panic was rising up inside him, the desperate need to run, to hide, to escape from this terrible place. But Danny had lived through this before. He knew how the story ended. His father had found him, cold and crying but alive. The fear had not killed him then, and it would not kill him now. "I remember this," he said out loud, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "I was so scared. I thought I was going to die out there in those woods, but I did not die. I made it through." The forest flickered and changed. Now Danny was standing in a hospital room, watching his grandfather take his last breath. The machines beeped and then went silent. His mother sobbed in the corner. His father stood with his hand on Danny's shoulder, and Danny felt the weight of loss pressing down on him like a physical thing. "This was hard," Danny admitted. "This is still hard. I miss him every day. But you know what? He would not want me to be afraid of death. He would want me to live my life and remember him with love, not fear." The hospital room dissolved into darkness, and Danny was floating in space, surrounded by stars that seemed impossibly far away. Earth was just a tiny blue dot in the distance, barely visible, and Danny was alone in the void with nothing but the cold and the silence. "Yeah, space is terrifying," Danny said, "but it is also beautiful, and I chose to come out here. I chose to leave Earth and see what else the universe had to offer. Fear did not stop me from making that choice. Fear does not get to control my life." The void around him began to shift and change, but now the transformations were different. They were less aggressive, less focused on breaking him down. It was as if the creature controlling the chamber was no longer trying to attack him. It was trying to understand him. Danny noticed the change, and an idea began to form in his mind. He sat down on the floor of nothingness, crossing his legs beneath him as if he were sitting in his room back home. The darkness swirled around him, and he could feel the presence of Specimen 77 pressing close, studying him with something that felt almost like confusion. "You must be pretty lonely," Danny said. The darkness did not respond, but Danny felt a flicker of something in the air. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. "Think about it," he continued. "You have been locked up in this academy for what, 100 years, poked and prodded by scientists. used as a test for students who do not even see you as a person. Everyone who comes in here is so terrified of you that they cannot think of anything except their own fear. No one has ever just talked to you, have they? The whispers in the air changed. They were no longer trying to sound like people Danny loved. They were formless now, uncertain, like a voice that had forgotten how to speak. Back where I come from, Danny said, we have this thing called empathy. It means trying to understand what someone else is feeling, even if they are very different from you. And right now, I am trying to understand you. You feed on fear because that is what you were made to do. But is that really all you want? Is fear really all you need? The darkness pulled back slightly, as if the creature was taking a step away from him. The cold air began to warm. The oppressive weight on Danny's chest began to lighten. I'm not going to pretend that I am not scared of you, Danny said honestly. I am terrified. You are ancient and powerful, and you could probably break my mind into a million pieces if you really wanted to. But fear is just a feeling. It does not have to be the only feeling. I can be scared of you and curious about you at the same time. I can be afraid and still want to understand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Danny sat in the darkness and waited, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe Specimen 77 did not want to be understood. Maybe it was perfectly happy consuming fear and had no interest in anything else. Then a voice spoke directly into his mind. It was not like the whispers before. It was not trying to sound like anyone Danny knew. It was something entirely new, a consciousness reaching out to make contact for the first time in longer than Danny could imagine. The voice said, "You are not afraid of me." "I told you I am terrified," Danny replied. "No," the voice said. "You feel fear, but you are not controlled by it. You do not let it define you. You are afraid of me, but you are not afraid of me. How is this possible?" Danny thought about the question for a moment. "I guess because I have learned that fear is not the enemy. Fear is just information. It tells me that something might be dangerous, but it does not tell me what to do about it. I get to choose how I respond. And right now, I am choosing to respond with curiosity instead of panic." The darkness around him began to change again. This time, the shapes that formed were not nightmares. They were abstract patterns, swirling colors, images that seemed to come from somewhere deep and strange. Danny felt like he was looking at the thoughts of an alien mind, seeing things that no human had ever seen before. "I have consumed the fears of countless beings," the voice said. "I have been used as a weapon, as a tool, as a test. But no one has ever asked me what I want. No one has ever tried to understand me." "I am asking now," Danny said. "What do you want?" The patterns in the darkness slowed and shifted, forming something that almost looked like a face. It was not human, not alien, not anything Danny could have imagined. But somehow it looked sad. "I do not know," the voice admitted. "I have never been given the choice." Danny nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "maybe it is time to figure that out together." And in that moment, something changed between them. The human and the ancient creature, sitting together in the darkness, began to build something that had never existed before. A connection. Outside the examination chamber, alarms were screaming. Professor stood at the observation window, his forearms pressed against the glass, his purple scales flushed dark with confusion and something that might have been fear. The monitors that tracked Specimen 77's vital signs were going crazy. Energy readings that had remained stable for decades were suddenly fluctuating wildly. The temperature inside the chamber was rising. The electromagnetic fields were shifting in patterns that no one had ever seen before. "What is happening in there?" demanded Director, the elderly who ran the academy. His 6 eyes blinked rapidly as he studied the readouts. "What is that human doing?" "I do not know," Professor admitted. "No student has ever lasted this long without showing signs of psychological distress, and Specimen 77 has never behaved like this before. It is almost as if it is calming down." The director's eyes narrowed. calming down. That creature has never calmed down in its entire existence. Get the human out of there immediately. We need to understand what is happening. Security teams rushed to the chamber door, ready to override the locks and pull Danny Cole to safety. But when they tried to open the door, nothing happened. The locks had been sealed from the inside, not by any human hand, but by Specimen 77 itself. "It is blocking us," one of the security officers reported, his voice tight with concern. "The creature does not want us to enter." Director turned to Professor. "Can we force our way in?" The professor shook his head. "Not without risking serious harm to both the human and the specimen. Whatever is happening in there, we need to let it play out." Inside the chamber, Danny and Specimen 77 continued their conversation. The darkness around them had transformed into something almost peaceful, filled with soft colors and gentle movements. Danny had never felt anything quite like it before. It was as if he was floating in the thoughts of another being, sharing something deep and private that words could not describe. "They will try to separate us," the voice in his mind said. "They fear what they cannot control." "Can you really blame them?" Danny replied. "You did spend the last century giving people nightmares." There was a pause, and Danny felt something that might have been embarrassment flowing through the connection between them. "I did what my nature demanded," the voice said. "I fed on fear because fear was all that was offered to me. No one ever offered anything else. No one ever tried to give me anything other than terror." Danny nodded slowly. "That makes sense. If all you ever get is fear, then fear is all you know how to take. But what if there was something else? What if someone offered you something different?" The colors around him shifted, becoming warmer and brighter. Danny could feel the creature's curiosity growing, mixing with something that felt almost like hope. "What would you offer me?" the voice asked. Danny thought about it carefully. "Understanding, I guess. Connection. The chance to be seen as more than just a weapon or a test. You are alive, right? You think and feel and experience the universe. That means you deserve to be treated as a person, not a thing." "I have never been treated as a person," the voice said quietly. "I have always been a specimen, a number, a tool to be used and discarded." "Yeah," Danny said softly. "I know that feeling. Not in the same way you do, but I understand what it is like to feel like you do not belong, to feel like everyone sees you as something less than what you really are." The colors around him pulsed gently, and Danny felt a wave of warmth flow through the connection between them. It was gratitude, he realized. Pure, simple gratitude from a being that had never received kindness before. "You are strange," the voice said. "Your species is very strange. How can you feel fear and compassion at the same time? How can you be terrified of me and still want to help me?" "Humans are complicated," Danny admitted with a small smile. "We feel lots of different things all at once. Sometimes it gets confusing, but most of the time it works out okay. We can hate something and love something at the same time. We can be scared and brave at the same time. We are kind of a mess, honestly, but it is who we are." "I think I would like to understand your species better," the voice said. "I think I would like to understand you better." Before Danny could respond, the chamber door exploded inward. Security officers poured into the room, their weapons raised and ready. Behind them came Professor and Director, their faces twisted with fear and confusion. They had expected to find either a traumatized human or a dangerously evolved monster. What they found instead stopped them all in their tracks. Danny Cole was standing in the center of the room, completely calm and unharmed. Beside him floated something that no one had ever seen before. Specimen 77 had changed. It was no longer a formless darkness or a shifting mass of nightmares. It had compressed itself into something smaller, something almost delicate. It glowed with soft light, and it hovered close to Danny's shoulder like a loyal companion. "Everyone stay calm," Danny said, raising his hand slowly. "Nobody needs to panic here." "What have you done?" Director demanded, his 6 eyes fixed on the transformed creature. "What have you done to Specimen 77? "I talked to it," Danny said simply. "I listened, I tried to understand, that is all." The security officers kept their weapons trained on the glowing form beside Danny, but they did not fire. Something in the creature's posture, in the gentle way it pulsed with light, suggested that violence was the last thing on its mind. "It needs to be contained," Professor said, his voice strained. "We need to study what has happened and understand the changes." The creature beside Danny pulsed brighter for a moment, and Danny felt its thoughts flow into his mind. "I will not be contained again," the voice said firmly. "I will not be studied like an object. I will not go back to that existence." Danny nodded slowly. "It does not want to be locked up anymore," he said out loud. "And honestly, I think it has earned the right to make that choice." "This is not your decision to make," the director said sharply. "Specimen 77 is the property of the Galactic Scientific Consortium. It has been in their custody for nearly a century." "Property," Danny repeated, and there was something cold in his voice now. "You are calling a living, thinking, feeling being property. Do you realize how wrong that is?" The room went very quiet. The security officers looked uncertain. Professor Scales flushed darker with what might have been shame. The creature beside Danny pulsed again, and this time the entire room felt its thoughts. "I will work with this human," the voice said, and everyone could hear it. "I will cooperate with your studies and your research, but only through him. Any attempt to separate us will be met with resistance. Any attempt to treat me as property will be answered in ways you cannot imagine." Director 6 eyes blinked rapidly. "Are you threatening us?" "No," the voice said calmly. "I am setting boundaries, something I should have done a very long time ago." Danny looked at the creature beside him, at this ancient being that had chosen to trust him out of everyone in the galaxy. He did not fully understand what was happening or what it would mean for his future, but he knew one thing for certain. He was not going to abandon Specimen 77. "I guess we have some things to figure out," Danny said to the stunned officials. "But whatever happens next, we are in this together." The creature pulsed warmly in agreement, and somewhere in its ancient consciousness, something that had been frozen for thousands of years began to thaw. It felt, for the first time in its existence, like it was not alone. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. A human student at the academy had done the impossible. He had entered the chamber with Specimen 77, the most feared entity in known space, and he had walked out with a new friend. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting the story. Within days, diplomatic ships from a dozen different species were arriving at the academy, demanding answers. Danny Cole, the quiet kid from Nebraska, had become the most famous human in the galaxy. He sat in a waiting room outside the Grand Council chamber, trying not to think about the hundreds of alien dignitaries who were about to decide his fate. The creature that everyone was now calling Seven, at Danny's suggestion, floated beside him. It had taken to manifesting as a small cloud of softly glowing mist, gentle and unassuming, nothing like the terrifying presence that had broken so many minds over the centuries. Morgan found him there, sitting alone with his otherworldly companion. "You realize you just adopted an immortal fear monster, right?" she said, dropping into the seat beside him. Danny glanced at Seven, who pulsed warmly at his approach. "I prefer to think of it as making a new friend who happens to be very old and very misunderstood." Shook her head, but she was smiling. Only a human would look at something like that and think about making friends. The rest of the galaxy is absolutely terrified of you right now, you know. "Terrified of me?" Danny asked, surprised. "Why?" "Because you did something that no one else could do. You faced the thing that everyone fears and you turned it into an ally. The other species are starting to wonder what else humans might be capable of." Before Danny could respond, The doors to the council chamber opened, and an official called his name. It was time to face the most powerful beings in the galaxy and explain what he had done. The Grand Council chamber was enormous, a vast circular room with seats rising up in tiers around a central platform. Representatives from hundreds of different species sat watching as Danny walked to the center of the room, Seven floating faithfully beside him. The silence was heavy and oppressive, filled with judgment and fear. Director stood at the highest tier, his 6 eyes fixed on Danny with an expression that was impossible to read. "Danny Cole of Earth," he said formally, "you stand before this council to answer for your actions regarding the entity known as Specimen 77. Do you understand the seriousness of this proceeding?" "I understand," Danny said, keeping his voice steady. "Then explain yourself," the director said. "How did you accomplish what you accomplished? And what do you propose we do with the entity that has now bonded itself to you?" Danny took a deep breath and looked around at the assembled dignitaries. He saw and dozens of species he did not recognize. They were all watching him with a mixture of curiosity and fear, waiting to hear what this strange little human had to say. "I did not do anything special," Danny began. "I just talked to Seven. Everyone was so focused on what it could do to them that nobody ever stopped to ask what had been done to it. For a century, this being has been treated as a weapon, a tool, a test. It was locked up and studied and used to break people's minds. Nobody ever treated it like a person. Nobody ever tried to understand." The chamber was silent. Danny continued. "Seven was not evil. It was scared and alone and doing the only thing it knew how to do. When all you ever receive is fear, fear becomes the only language you know how to speak. But when I offered something different, when I offered understanding and empathy and connection, Seven responded to that. It chose to trust me because I was the first being in 1,000 years who bothered to ask what it wanted." An ambassador rose from his seat. "You are comparing this ancient entity to normal people. You are suggesting that it deserves the same consideration we would give to any sentient being." "Why not?" Danny asked. "Loneliness does not care how old you are or what species you belong to. Neither does the need to be understood. Seven has thoughts and feelings and experiences. It can make choices and learn new things and change. If that does not make someone a person, I do not know what does." Seven pulsed beside him, and Danny felt its gratitude flowing through the connection between them. For a moment, the entire council felt it too, a wave of warm emotion that was nothing like the fear they had always associated with Specimen 77. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species wanted Seven destroyed, too afraid of what it might become if it was allowed to remain free. Others wanted it studied more intensively, convinced that it could be turned into an even more powerful weapon. A few argued that it should be released entirely, left to drift through space as it had done before being captured. In the end, it was Director who proposed the solution. "The entity has made its position clear," he said, his voice tired but resigned. "It will cooperate only through Danny Cole. Any attempt to separate them will be resisted. Given this reality, I propose that we formalize this arrangement. Danny Cole will become humanity's first psychological liaison, specializing in entities previously classified as hostile. Seven will remain with him, under observation but not imprisonment. Together, they will help us understand beings that we have always feared and never tried to comprehend." The vote was close, but it passed. Danny walked out of the council chamber with a new title and a new purpose. He was no longer just a scholarship student from Earth. He was something entirely new, a bridge between species, a translator of fears into understanding. Was waiting for him outside. "So they made you the official monster whisperer," she said with a grin. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying," Danny admitted, "but I think I can handle it." Seven pulsed warmly at his shoulder, and Danny felt a sense of peace flowing through their connection. For the first time since it was captured, the ancient entity was not hungry. It was not searching for fear to consume. It was content, satisfied by something far more nourishing than terror. Connection. As they walked through the academy corridors, other students stepped aside to let them pass. Some looked at Danny with fear, others with admiration, and a few with something that might have been hope. Word had spread about what he had done, and the implications were still sinking in. If a human could befriend the most terrifying entity in the galaxy, what else might be possible? Danny thought about all the other beings out there, the ones that other species had given up on, the ones that were locked away and feared and never understood. He thought about the walls that separated different kinds of minds, the barriers of fear and prejudice that kept beings from truly seeing each other. And he thought about how those walls might be broken down, one conversation at a time. "You know," he said to Seven, "I think we have a lot of work to do." Seven pulsed in agreement. And across the galaxy, beings who had long dismissed humanity as a young and unremarkable species began to see them in a new light. Not because humans were the strongest or the most advanced, but because they had something that other species had forgotten was possible. The stubborn, ridiculous, beautiful courage to sit with monsters in the dark and offer them kindness instead of fear. Danny Cole, the quiet kid from Nebraska, had shown the galaxy what humans could do. And the galaxy would never forget it.